Let's think a little bit about what happens when you or one of your banks requests a credit report on you. So they will go to one of the three major credit bureaus, and we're talking about a U.S. specific situation right over here. So one of the three major credit bureaus in the U.S. And one of those credit bureaus, let's say that your bank goes to Equifax. It could also go to Experian or TransUnion. But let's say that they decide to go to Equifax. So they say, Equifax, we're going to pay you some money. In exchange, I want a number that tells me how good of a credit risk, let's say it's for me. Let's say they want to know how good of a credit risk Sal is. So Equifax is already going to have all of this data on it. So the relationships with banks go two ways. Banks request credit reports, and also, and not just banks, we're talking about credit card companies and other types of financial institutions as well. They're the people, they're essentially the customers. They will pay Equifax in exchange for a credit report, but they'll also provide Equifax with data. So this data right over here, this is how well I've paid my bills in the past. This is how much debt I have. This is the types of credit that I might have. And Equifax is going to take this data and they're going to input it into a credit model. Now, the most typical one that they will use, or the one that most banks will request right now, is a FICO score, which implies that you're going to use the FICO model. So they're going to take the data. If the request was from Equifax, Equifax will take the data that it happens to have on Sal. It will input it if a FICO score was requested, and then out will come a score between 300 and 850. And the higher, the better. And every time they do this, because this model was developed by a third party, and it really is a bit of a black box. Very few people, and those who have are essentially sworn to secrecy, know exactly how this data is taken and turned around and munched around and produces a score. And it's constantly being tweaked, arguably, to improve it, to make it a better predictor of someone's creditworthiness. But every time Equifax or Experian or TransUnion takes their data that they've collected from financial institutions and puts it into the FICO model to produce a score that they can then give back to your bank, they've got to share some of that money, and actually a reasonable chunk of it, with the Fair Isaac Corporation. The Fair Isaac Corporation. Now, you could imagine that the credit bureaus were not happy or aren't super excited about only having one option here for the credit model. So in 2006, they created an alternate model, which is called the Vantage score. The Vantage score. And as you see between the two, they use similar inputs, and I'll talk about that in a second. But this is just for you to realize that Equifax, if the bank that's trying to get information on you, instead of saying, hey, I want a FICO score, instead they say, hey, I want a Vantage score, Equifax could take that same data that it inputted into the FICO model, and it could input it into the Vantage model, and then come up with a score. And the Vantage model used to have a score range from 501 to 990, but now that too has a range from 300 to 850. Now, even though these are two different models, and there could be other models that are even less that are less used than the FICO model or the Vantage model, the general dynamics of what goes into them are reasonably well understood. Although no one knows the exact algorithm, no one knows exactly what happens here. These are kind of black, or a few people know exactly what happens here, and most of them work for the Fair Isaac Corporation. And they're sworn to secrecy. No one knows exactly how the score is spit out, and it's constantly being tweaked, arguably to make it better. But we see here that the general parameters are kind of similar. Roughly a third, so 35% of the FICO score and 32% of the Vantage score are based on payment history. Have you paid your bills on time? Did you have any delinquent payments, or do you have any late payments? That obviously, paying on time will improve your score. Late payments would hurt your score. Then another big chunk, and this is a little over a third or for both of them, or actually roughly a third for FICO, and it seems like a little over a third for Vantage score, is the total amount of debt you have, how much you've utilized your credit. So utilization is if you have 30,000 of available credit, so this is how much you could borrow, and let's say you end up borrowing 10,000. So then you've utilized 1/3 of your available credit. So this right over here would be 33.3% 33.3% utilization. If you had available 100,000 in credit and you utilized 10,000, then you would have 10% utilization. So here on the FICO score, the amount owed, this takes into account what do you owe, how much you could borrow, things like utilization. Vantage score breaks it out a little bit more explicitly when they talk about the things that they care about. Here you have utilization, but related to that, you also have total balances, and you also have available credit. So these three things are related to this here. So looking at the Vantage score, at least superficially, based on the publicly available data, it looks like they take all of this information, your utilization, your balances, your available credit, and it's a larger chunk. It's a larger chunk than the situation with the FICO score. But in general, in either one, it's a very important thing. And this is why a lot of financial advisors will tell you, keep a credit card, try to get it so that you have a lot of available credit, and use it a little bit, but don't max out your credit cards. In fact, the rule of thumb that I've heard talking to experts about this is that you want to be under 30% utilization, and the people with the best credit scores have utilizations well, definitely under 30%, but I've seen some data around 7 to 10% is about optimal utilization. But the folks that I've spoken to said definitely you want to keep your utilization under 30%. You want to have credit cards, you want to use them, but you want to keep your utilization low. Now, the last chunk of both of these credit reports are essentially your length of credit history. The longer, the better. It's actually a misconception that your credit report or your credit score is based on age. But what does go into it, and I guess this does correlate with age, is your length of credit history, the types of credit uses, and these kind of fall into depth of credit in the Vantage score, and also the idea of new credit. So if you're going out there and you're getting a bunch of new credit cards, that probably won't be reflected well in your credit score. And this also touches on another misconception that a lot of folks have. So in general, if I were to go right now and apply for 10 credit cards, then each of those credit card issuers would go to one of these credit bureaus, and it would make what is called a hard inquiry. So when a bank says, hey, I am thinking about giving Sal a loan, I'm going to go to one of the credit bureaus, and they're going to use one of these models, and I'm asking them the credit score so that because I'm just trying to decide whether I should give this person a credit card or what the interest rate should be or a mortgage. That is called a hard inquiry. A hard inquiry. And many, many hard inquiries. You could get one or two, but if you get a ton of hard inquiries in a short amount of time, that is usually perceived to be a red flag. So if you get a bunch of hard inquiries, that could, or if you get a bunch of them, that will ding your credit score. Now, the misconception that a lot of people have is that any inquiry will ding your credit score. So if your landlord were to look at your credit score, not to give you a loan, but just to get a general sense of your credit worthiness, or if an employer were to look at it, or if you were to look at your credit score, which you should do on a regular basis, if you were to do it just to kind of find out what the score is, that's called a soft inquiry. It's a soft inquiry because you're not trying to get the score in order to give debt. These hard inquiries, they ding it because if you get a ton of them, if you got 10 hard inquiries in a week, it looks like you're really desperate for debt. But the soft inquiries, these are just information. The person isn't actually trying to loan you things. This could be even yourself, just trying to find out what your credit score looks like. And soft inquiries, at least based on my understanding, I've talked to a bunch of experts on this, soft inquiries have no impact on your credit score. It's only the hard inquiries that do. So the big takeaway from this, credit bureaus are the folks that collect the data. They're the folks that the banks or you might go to get a credit score, but they can use multiple credit models. FICO is the dominant one. There's also the Vantage model, and there could also be other ones that are even more proprietary to different groups. And the general breakdown is roughly a third payment history. The amount you owe and the credit utilization is a big deal. And then things like the depth of credit, the length of how long you've had a certain credit card, are there a lot of hard inquiries also matter. But soft inquiries don't. So you should definitely look into what your credit score is.